So I thought we'd do a lesson on polyrhythms because it's been a really long time since we've worked on rhythm at all, and I happen to think that polyrhythms are just one of the coolest things. So the plan is to first just start with what polyrhythms are in the sense of what they sound like, how they work, and just learn them in a theoretical, on paper kind of sense. And then we'll look at how to actually play one and how to teach yourself how to do this because mentally they're pretty difficult to approach, especially if you've never tried to do this kind of thing before. So this lesson will be part theory and then part performance, I guess. So a polyrhythm is just when you play two fundamentally different rhythms at the same time. I'll show you what I mean. So if I were to play just straight eighth notes, like this, just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, that would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm going to draw a little timeline here so we can kind of see what's happening. All that I'm doing there is I'm splitting each beat into two parts, right? So there's a note that happens at the beginning of the beat, it lasts halfway through, and then I have a note that starts halfway through the beat and lasts for the second part. So it's something like that. Okay, so that's all well and good. And then suppose that for the next measure, I played triplets, right? So that would look like this. If I can get around this microphone. Okay, and you can count this as just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Some people like to count it as triplet. Doesn't matter too much. The important part here is that you're cutting each beat into three pieces. So it sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Right. So in this case, I'm shoving more notes in there, so they have to go a little bit faster because I fit more in the same space. And each one just lasts for a third of the beat, right? So this first one lasts for the first third, and then this one lasts for the third, and then this one lasts for that last third, right? Something along those lines, okay. So that's simple enough. If I were to play that, I'm gonna listen to myself this time. This would sound 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This would sound 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, simple enough. But if I play those two things at the same time, so in this case I'll have my left hand do this and my right hand play that, that is what creates a polyrhythm. So that would sound like this. My right hand is doing that triplet thing. My left hand is just doing those straight A's, like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Right? That's a polyrhythm. Now, I'm going to kind of rewrite this to where they're both together so you can see them lined up. All right, so there's our polyrhythm, and you can see how the notes don't line up, right? The very beginning of the beat, those notes are happening at the same time, but everything else is out of order, and you can't really put this note anywhere inside this rhythmic pattern. They are just different. Now there's other kind of polyrhythms too, right? This is what you would call a 3 against 2 polyrhythm, but if I instead had 16th notes here, I could do what's called a 3 against 4 polyrhythm. So that would sound something like this. Now that one's a bit busier sounding because there's just more happening all at once, but fundamentally the same idea. Now there's other stuff that can look like a polyrhythm but isn't. So if, for example, if I had like 8th notes and 16th notes, it almost looks like that's a polyrhythm, but it's really not, because if I did that, which is just this, right, those, they line up exactly right. Like the 16th notes are just like the 8th notes. It's just you're dividing up the beat a little bit further. So they align up perfectly, and there's really nothing different about those two rhythms. So you could have, R3 against 2, you could have a 3 against 4. 6 against 4. You could do really strange things like 7 against 5 if you divide the beats up into odd numbers. So there's really weird stuff like that, and we won't really mess with any of that today, but that is the fundamental idea. Now, I'm going to try to show you how to play this particular polyrhythm. But before I do, I want to just play around with this for a second. I'm just going to play through a couple chord progressions, and I want you to just listen to it and let your mind focus in on the right hand, which is doing this triplet-like rhythm, right? And then switch your focus after a few seconds to the left hand and listen to that just straight eighth, that rhythm. And you can even kind of drift back and forth and just hear each one. And what's so cool about this is just that there are these two things happening at the same time, and your mind can kind of fixate on one or the other or even move in between. And it just creates this really cool kind of effect. So I won't talk over this. I'll just play through 15 seconds or so of chord progressions and just do that. Just listen to what's going on here. Something like that. And I hope you can kind of hear how these two different things are happening at the same time. Like I said, I think it is just really cool. All right. So let's look at how to actually play something like this, right? Now, for a lot of people, when you first approach this, it's like, how? I mean, there's two things happening at the same time. I mean, you can play this, and then you can switch to play this. Or sorry, that's the wrong tempo. Right? But how are you supposed to do those things at the same time? And people run into this issue all the time for other areas of music, right? Like they'll be just learning piano and be thinking like, oh, I can kind of play, but I can't do two hands at the same time. That just seems crazy. Or how am I supposed to play guitar chords while I'm singing? Like I just can't do two things at once. And you're right, you can't do two things at once. You're just not wired that way. The idea of multitasking is kind of a myth. To oversimplify a bit, a computer can do more than one thing at once, right? It has a multi-core processor. So one core can be doing one thing while the other core is off doing something else, right? But you can't. You are a single core processor. You can really only handle one thing to focus on at once. So the secret to this is to figure out a way of turning this, rather than being two things happening at the same time, you have to turn it into one thing happening that you can understand and focus on and learn, right? So here's how you do that. As I said, if you try to count this out, this, one and, how did I count it? One and two and kind of thing, you can't do that at the same time that you're counting one and two and. They're totally different. But if you change the way you count these things, you can make it work. So here's how you do that. For this part with the straight eighth notes, instead of just dividing this beat into two little parts like we were, and then just counting one and two and, you can cut each one of these pieces into three. So instead of counting one and two and, you would cut this up into three little divisions, something like that. I won't do all of this. And to count this, ideally you use the number for the beat. So it'd be nice to be able to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then use something else to mark each little time tick. But there's way too much going on here to try to do that. We just are going to run out of vowel sounds to be shoving in there. So for now, we'll just count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? It's not ideal, but it'll work for now, and it's only a temporary thing anyway. So you would count this like that. Okay? And that would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It feels kind of like 6, 8. Okay, now for this, we were dividing the beat into three parts. So instead of doing, it looked kind of like that. We'll cut each one of those thirds in half. So it becomes becomes that. So rather than counting, 1 and 2, and we'll divide that up into 6 parts, and then we can just do it the same way. Just use the numbers to count it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just like that. Now the counting is a bit awkward for each one individually, but it lets us count them both at the same time and line them up on the same timeline. So by counting 6-beat divisions, counting 1 through 6, we can figure out exactly where all of these notes go. So these 2 notes happen on 1. We'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And what you would want to do here is just sit here, slowly count it out, and just make sure you get each note lined up in exactly the right spot. And at first it's pretty tedious, but eventually get comfortable with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just like that. And if this is even difficult, just doing it on the keys, you can work on it just by tapping your fingers, just trying to get the rhythm down. In fact, even if you don't have trouble using the keys, I think that's a pretty good idea. You just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, once you're at this point where you can play this, by counting it out and going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Once you're at that point, there's a long way to go before you can really do this. This is a far cry from sitting there and playing through chords and doing all that stuff. So your goal here is to take this and internalize it. Get it to be something that just lives deep inside your brain where you just don't have to think about it. It's kind of like if you've ever seen, a baby learning how to walk. When they're trying it, like it's really ridiculous. All their muscles are going in weird directions and they fall over and they're like really concentrating on how to move their legs and what muscles to fire. And they don't know how to do it yet. So everything is this conscious decision about what muscle to use and what to do when. But after a while, they get it down to where you can just walk around. And, as an adult, you walk around all the time without even thinking about it at all. You just say, hey, I'm going to walk, and that unconscious brain just takes care of every single muscle that needs to fire and all the little adjustments and stuff. Same kind of thing here. You're trying to take something that's initially this conscious, thought-out process, and you're trying to turn it into something that's just unconscious where you can sit here and play it and you don't even have to think about it. Now, this can be a bit of a slow process, and you have to be careful with it because it's very easy to teach yourself or teach that unconscious part of your mind something that's not quite right, and then you'll be forever having trouble with this. So here's how I recommend doing it. There's a couple steps to it. First is what I just said. Sit there, count it out, think hard about it, make sure every note is lined up exactly right. You'll sit here and do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Sit there and do that slowly and carefully. Make sure you have it right. For the next step, instead of and when I say count it, I mean audibly count it out. You want to be able to hear yourself. That helps you just make sure that it's lined up right. But once you feel good with that, then move to just speaking the rhythm still, but don't use the counting. Just kind of vocalize it. So you could just say, bum, bum, or bum, 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 something like that. Just use a sound out that rhythm. I mean, once you've done the counting and you've started to hear this and taught it to yourself and you can just speak the rhythm. So once you feel comfortable with that, where that's been fairly well internalized, then switch to doing the same thing, but don't audibly speak that rhythm. Just keep it inside your head and just be thinking bum, 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 bum. But be very conscious about hearing that rhythm internally. And then you just sit there and play it. Right? Make sure you feel very comfortable. And remember, you have to be careful because once you start internalizing, like at this point, you're not counting, you're not saying anything audible. It's very easy for this to get kind of messed up where the notes aren't lined up quite right. And since you're just going by your memory of this rhythm and what feels right, it's easy to kind of screw this up. Now, this particular polyrhythm isn't too bad, But for some of the more advanced ones, it's really easy to do, especially like even just 3/4. It's so easy to mess up the way the notes are lined up. So you really want to be careful. Keep backing up, count it out, make sure it works right, and then keep moving through those steps. But once you're there, once you feel comfortable with playing this and just thinking about that rhythmic sound internally, then you can start to work the tempo up and just play a little bit faster. And just focus on being able to hear that bump, 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 all the way through. Make sure that's still there and it still sounds right. And then once you feel good with that, then you can start moving to different chords and notes and trying out different things. And you would be surprised at how difficult this will suddenly get when you just make a simple change, like just switching up the hands where you're doing the triplet thing there and the eighth note here. Be surprised, one little change and everything feels hard again. Or just even doing different chords or different notes that you're playing, just the sound of it suddenly feels different, and that memory of what it feels like can just feel kind of messed up. So give yourself plenty of time and just work on getting that internalized. Now as you work on this, you might notice something kind of odd when you sit here and count this out in that 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. That when you're playing it at that tempo and counting it out deliberately like that, it doesn't sound all that special. Like it just doesn't feel like there's a whole lot going on. And if you think about it, if I were writing a song in like 3/4, and just suppose I said, okay, I'm gonna have my right hand play quarter notes, pretty normal, and then in my left hand I'll do, say, a quarter note, a rest, and then an eighth note or something like that. In that case, I would be counting this out as 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? And that would sound like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, which is exactly what we're doing here. But this doesn't seem all that special at all. It's a pretty run off the middle, not that exciting rhythm, and you wouldn't go, oh wow, a polyrhythm, that's so crazy. And that's really just because of the tempo. This is played fairly slow and somewhat deliberately, and at that speed it just doesn't feel anymore like there's these two things happening at the same time. When you play it faster and you're dividing up, or you're accenting this as the beginning of a beat and that is the beginning of a beat, and you're not hitting every note in between, it starts to separate a bit and it begins to feel like there's these two things happening at once. But for that reason right there, there's not actually a super clear-cut definition of what a polyrhythm actually is, because whatever rhythm you have, if you break it up and you start looking at the measure as a whole bunch of little divisions, which is exactly what we did here, once you do that, then it doesn't feel like there's two things, it feels like there's one thing. And that was our entire goal with this. So the actual definition's a bit foggy. It can depend on how fast you're playing something and how you're accenting it. So just understand that when you're working on these, but something like this, played at a quick tempo, it absolutely does sound like there's two things going on at once. Right, so you would absolutely call that a polyrhythm. All right, so that's really all I wanted to get through on this. If this is something that's interesting to you guys and you want to explore this more, let me know, and I can do a follow-up lesson with some of the other polyrhythms like 3/4 and how to figure that out, or even something like 6/4 and that kind of thing. Those are the same idea, but they can be much more challenging to work out. So you have to change your approach a little bit. But anyway, that's all for now. Thanks again to all the patrons for making this happen. You guys are amazing. If anyone else wants to get on board and help fund the channel, check that out. Otherwise, let me know what you'd like to see next, and I will see you guys again soon.